You'll just keep admitting people.
Okay.
So
Got it.
welcome everyone to our schmooze with Jennifer Moses. It is February, what is it today? The 23rd?
23rd.
Thank you. I'm on the other side of the country, so I've lost all sense of time. And
Me
space.
too. And you know what? Mark Oppenheimer is also headed to California to give a
Oh,
talk. So
wonderful. We're all here. We're waiting
Yes.
on the side of the world. I'm very excited to welcome Jennifer to speak tonight, and we've been anticipating this for a while. I think Rachel's going to do your formal introduction.
I can do it.
Or oh, great, Helen's
Because
going
I'm
to do the
here.
formal
That was
introduction.
yeah.
Excellent. And then we'll get started.
Well, I feel like I've known Jennifer for a long time, not just because we've had several conversations over the past several months, but because I've read 2 books of her short stories. The newer one, that The Man Who Loved His Wife, that is for sale in the gift shop, and one from a few years ago called Visiting Hours. Just wonderful characterizations in the books. She is an eclectic writer and visual artist and is joining us from her home in Montclair, New Jersey to discuss The Man Who Loved His Wife, a collection of short stories which she has described as about Jews being Jews. She excels at writing both fiction and nonfiction with a wry sense of humor that informs both. Her journalistic and opinion pieces have been published in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, the Jerusalem Report, and many others. She also writes a blog, which is featured in the Times of Israel. We are fortunate to have her with us to share her insights with us this
Okay. Is it my turn? Okay. Since everybody's muted, I have no idea if I'm supposed to be talking or not. So if somebody could unmute and just direct me.
Yes, you should be
Shauna.
talking right now.
Okay.
You are welcome to speak
It's
now.
just this whole Zoom thing is just so weird, as we all know. But thank you for that introduction. I think like probably pretty much every writer I know, I suffer from what's it called, imposter syndrome. Like, really, do I write characters who are interesting? Like, not that I have devoted my entire adult life to trying to write something that other people want to read, because that's that's what's in me. It's not, writing is not a private art, no arts, I don't think of private art. Diary writing isn't an art. That's a relationship you have with yourself. It's a conversation you're having with yourself when you're writing fiction, poetry, any form, or painting or dancing or acting. That's a relationship you're having with other human beings. So that said, this book of 13 short stories, I actually, my first impulse as a writer from the time I was, really in high school, was to write short stories. And when I was in high school, it was still a time when people read short stories, and they were taught in schools, and those of us who had literary aspirations, wanted to grow up to be any number of short story writers, and we devoured what was in the New Yorker and that kind of thing. And short stories have really fallen out of favor in what's left of the literary sphere. Now that, I don't know about your brains, but my brain has been taken over by Netflix. So people don't read as much. We don't read as much as we used to. I think that's a fact. And the publishing landscape itself has changed, and it's not, for my purposes, it's changed in ways that I don't like at all, because the publishing landscape doesn't like short stories very much. Which is why, long story short, why I ended up publishing these particular short stories with such a tiny little press that I'm not even sure the press exists. Mayapple Press, my publisher. So, but the short stories themselves, I wrote over the course of, I don't know, many, many years. And all of the short stories in the collection were previously published, but one short story, which I hadn't managed to get placed at the time I was putting the collection together. And I put that particular story in anyway because I just liked it. I wanted it in the collection, and I believed in it, even though it didn't seem like the editors I had been sending it to did. So the way it works in my little sliver of the writing world is for short work, which would be essays, short stories, poetry, certainly. You send the work out to literary magazines and hope it gets published in a good one, or small magazines. So all these stories were published over the years in either literary or small magazines. And I just, against the advice of my own literary agent, I just kept writing short stories because they just come to me frequently and often with such force that it's as if the God, it's as if I've been given this gift. The gift is this story. You get to write it, and if you don't write it, I'm going to give it to somebody else. That's always what it feels like for me. There are sort of ideas out there in the idea sphere in the arts that, like, all these ideas that turn into art, all these nuggets of inspiration that become paintings, that become choreographed ballets, that become symphonic pieces, are just there. They're in the universe. And then, the gods of creativity zap them onto Beethoven, if you're Beethoven, or I don't know, IB Singer if you're IB Singer, and if you don't choose to obey the calling, then you're putz, and it'll be given to somebody else. So I try to, when something comes to me with that kind of force, I try to respect it and follow the force of the inspiration as best I can. And so with these stories, that is really what happened in all these stories. The stories just almost came to me in one fell swoop. Now, that said, somebody said earlier, I can't think it was you, Shoshana, that you enjoyed the Yiddish in the story. So I didn't. My backstory. I live in New Jersey now. Montclair, Jews, yay! My backstory is I grew up in McLean, Virginia, which is now a very swishy and sort of many McMansioned, very expensive, and not in any way particularly wooded suburb of Washington. But when I was growing up there, our next door neighbors literally were. The next door neighbor was a goat farm. I mean, literally. My mother used to take us through the woods to visit goats on the goat farm. We basically didn't have neighbors. We were just, and the town basically didn't have Jews. It wasn't that it was anti-Semitic. It's just like Jews didn't just. Why would a Jew move out to McLean, Virginia? There was no synagogue. There was no JCC. There were no neighbors. There were no neighbors. Like who do you borrow butter from? And my dad had been raised very, very traditionally in a very Jewish sliver of Baltimore. And he married my mother, who'd been raised Christmas tree reform in Scarsdale. And they basically had a mixed marriage. And then they basically invented a new religion that my father called Judaism, and that had elements of Judaism in it. But just it was a hodgepodge of stuff that seemed incomprehensible and difficult to me. And I was, as my siblings were, I was interested in as I got older, in like rock and roll or the Grateful Dead. And if I could have grown that long blonde hair and parted it down the middle and had a lot of bad boyfriends, I would have, but it wasn't in me. And so it was just, I wasn't oriented towards Judaism or Jewish culture at all. I do come from a very large family on both my mother and father's sides, but all my cousins on both sides live pretty far away. And anyway, you know, they were Yekkis, they were German Jews. So we didn't have even a smidge of Yiddish. Well, no, that's not true. My father sort of every now and again threw a Yiddishism around. You know, he had not grown up with Yiddish either. And he made up some stuff. He used to call us schmeiklers. Like I still remember that. Schmegagis and schmeiklers, so schmegagi. So, you know, and then Woody Allen came along, you know, may his name be blotted out, but, you know, with those movies, like I remember sitting in the movie theater with my little blonde friends, because everyone, even if they weren't blonde, they were blonde. And my mother and my sisters, and we'd be like laughing our heads off, and our friends didn't get the joke, you know. And so I just didn't have any of this stuff in my background at all. And in fact, by the time I tumbled into college, I was really felt alienated from Judaism, Jewish life, Jewishness. Like I didn't get it. My father, who was the Jew in the family, basically transmitted Judaism to me as something that's for boys, and even at work, you're not smart enough to get it. He was a little nuts, you know. He's still with me, thank God. You know, he's 92 and still driving all of us nuts. So we're very blessed that way. What happened to me in college was, like, first of all, there were other Jews. I went to Tufts. I started college in 1977, and at that time, I would say my class was 15%, maybe even 20% Jews. And they weren't Jews like me from Virginia who knew how to ride horses and skied and stuff like that. You know, they were like Jews from Long Island. They had Jewish accents and talked with their hands, and they had tacky houses like Jews are supposed to. And, you know, we grew up as, you know, kind of ersatz wasps. You know, we're German, very proud of being German Jewish. And I didn't understand any of that. Like, the Germans were the bad guys. Why are my parents so proud of being German Jews? So proud. And they were already fourth generation, you know. So I didn't get it. And then, you know, I went to college and I began to learn stuff. And the first thing I learned about Judaism was from my college roommate, Susan Gardner, who'd grown up in Margate, New Jersey, on the shore. And in fact, her father at one point had owned the Steel Pier. She was about as Jersey girl, local girl as you can get, Jewish. And she'd spend every summer, like, you know, on the Steel Pier selling, I don't know, cotton candy and taffy, saltwater taffy, and working for her dad since she was a little kid. And kind of rough and tumble, and lived in Jewish, you know, pretty much a Jewish neighborhood. And whereas, like, I'd spent my summers literally riding horses and learning to play tennis in Maine and stuff. And Susan told me that the way I had been raised had nothing to do with kosher. Now, my dad had told me me and my siblings, you know, my elderly siblings and me, we were kosher. You know, we had a kosher house, and what it was is we didn't eat heavy treif. I just didn't even know. I didn't know the word treif. We didn't eat heavy treif, so we were kosher. And it was Susan, my roommate, who pointed out that, you know, it was a little more to kosher than that. And so that was just the beginning. And then I started studying both Judaism, like, what is this religion that I feel so alienated from? And took basic religion classes in college, stuff like that. And I took a wildly popular class at Tufts at the time called Yidlit, which was always very highly subscribed. And I kind of got a beginning taste of, it was mainly short stories. You know, we weren't tackling the big fat novels of Dear Nuster and stuff like that, but it gave me a taste. And the teacher was wonderful and very funny, and he did Yiddish jokey jokes, and the Jews and non-Jews alike packed his classes, and they were also like an ACA, so had that advantage too. And that was just the beginning. And then I landed in New York after college. I got a job at Mademoiselle magazine, basically, like, writing about makeup tips. And I just, you know, now I'm in the city of Jews, and I just something inside me just kept driving me forward. I wanted what I felt I'd been deprived of by my childhood, by my parents' choices to plump us in the middle of, horsey, waspy, blue-blooded Arcadia in Virginia. And it wasn't a bad childhood. It wasn't like anti-Semitism. It was just very, very strange. It just weird, just weird. It deprived me, kind of deprived me of my heritage. Like I couldn't imbibe it in the environment. And my parents doubled down on their decision when they sent each of us to a private day school where we wore uniforms and we had the Christmas play and we said the Lord's Prayer. And almost all my classmates summered somewhere in the family summer place in, it was often the coast of Maine, sometimes it was Vermont. And we weren't poor. That wasn't it. It wasn't about money. My father was a lawyer and he became a partner at his law firm in Washington. So it wasn't about money. It was about class and ethnicities and identity and style. To this day, I have to wonder, like, what were you people thinking of? And we all had hair. Well, my hair was somewhat darker when I was a child. It's, I finally had the light hair I wanted as a kid. We were dark-haired, dark-eyed Jewish kids, and literally surrounded by these very, very waspy, freckled blonde kids who sailed off the coast of Maine in the summer. So it was a disconnect. So the Yiddish writing style that is in this collection is something I think to the degree I learned how to do it well, I wanted to do it well. And it's because when I discovered the great works of Yiddish literature, again, all in translation. I know as much Yiddish as you do, or maybe some of you really know Yiddish. I do not. I have friends who actually know Yiddish, they speak Yiddish. They understand it. I do not, even close. But when I started reading the great works of the great Yiddish masters in translation, I fell in love with this literature like no other literature I'd ever loved. And I, like so many Jews, I'm a serious reader. I gobble it up. I don't feel right about life when I don't have a book that I'm enjoying, that I'm really enjoying. And reading, just the act of reading is a huge part of like it's not even my happiness, it's my inner balance. It's like who I am on the inside needs to be fed by books on the outside. So I'd read the great Russian novelists and of course the great English novelists, of whom there are so many, and the great American novelists, and even some South and Central American novels, all in translation. The French novelists, pretty much the gamut of great world literature, which I'm still reading because I haven't finished, right? But again, when I came to the Yiddish novelists, fiction, the short story writers, and then the novelists, I felt like I'd entered, I'd entered the garden, and I wanted to be able to do what those writers did with bringing this mix of, poignancy, sort of misery and comedy, and very much sort of the way it is-ness, without a lot of literary flourish, without the words calling attention to themselves as beautiful language, even if the language is beautiful. And for example, all of the above, these writers, that it sort of reads like something like what life actually feels like. So I just read and read more of this stuff, and bit by bit, it kind of, the rhythms of this kind of approach, sort of this Yiddish approach, the rhythms of the culture, which are of course reflected in its literature, kind of just seeped into me in the way language seeps into a child, and the way musical rhythms seep into us, and the way rhythm in general, rhythm of other human beings, rhythm of the place, rhythm of the language, rhythm of music seeps into us. And I just started, not even like on purpose, willfully, but these stories that turned out to be about Jews and Jews thinking and living and behaving within a peculiarly Jewish framework just came to me, and I started writing them. So that's what this book is. Just one more thing, and then I've been talking plenty, which is that I do think Jews, we think and uh, maneuver ourselves in life, both inside ourselves and in the world, but in a Jewish way. We have to. It's historical. And it's particular to us. It doesn't make us different than other human beings. It means it makes our particularities our own particularities, that go along with our, being this, humans with human hearts like any other human with their own tribe and their own particularities and their own histories and their own languages. So that I hope when I do write about Jews in particular, that anybody could read my book and get it, even if they don't get every little jot and jot of, every reference. Like, there are no references to Purim in this book, but that would be a reference that like a lot of people wouldn't get, a lot of Americans wouldn't get. They get Passover, they get Hanukkah, Purim maybe not, but right. But in context, you hope, the reader just goes along, as I know I have, more times than I could possibly count when I'm reading literature that is not of my own time or place or language, or, everything again from Jane Austen to, I don't know, Tolstoy, I'm reading a great novel by a Suitable Boy, which is about 1 million pages long, by Vikram Seth. And right, I don't get any of the references, but you go along because the author, set in India by an Indian, about Indians, because the author it's the human drama you go along with, and you can look up the little specific references along the way. So anyway, that's what I got. And please, I've talked enough, and I'd love questions and observations. Praise, mainly praise, just kind of joking about that last one, but please.
Helen, do you want to go from your list of questions, or do other people have questions? If anybody wants to raise their hand and make a comment or ask a question, we'll entertain that, or Helen will go.
I could start. I just was impressed. That's the praise part in the book at the number, at the various ages and genders and backgrounds of the main characters. And there's some writers, they're always going to speak from one point of view, but to speak from so many points of view, I mean, you might say that just kind of came to you and that's who the people were, but was it difficult to inhabit these characters who came from such diverse places?
No, I mean, I wouldn't have written them if it had been, if it's like a stretch and I'm just bullshitting it, it comes out as not. If it doesn't come from deep inside, it doesn't happen, really. It's not authentic, it's not organic. But that said, I did pull these stories together in a certain way, in part because I like the mix that, it's not 7 female, post-middle-aged, anxious writers who live in New Jersey, in a way, in a row. So I pulled them together, trying to reflect some diversity of topic and location and so forth. I did, that I did on purpose, but in a way, they all come from me. They're all me, in a way. In a way, they're all me. You're muted, Helen. If you're still talking, I don't know if you are or not, but
yeah, that seems like the story of the schizophrenic with all the different personalities. It's like, wow, it must be kind of incredible to be able to be inhabited by all of those different types of people. because I think generally people who aren't writers, or maybe who are, tend to see the world from one perspective. So, in that way, you open yourself up to see the world from, a teenage girl's perspective, or a widowed, older man's perspective. And it's, and then in your other book, Visiting Hours, I mean, there were a lot of African-American characters and then gay characters, because it was about an AIDS clinic or a residential clinic. And that's an interesting part of your life that I'm aware of that you didn't share, and how that those 10 years or so where you volunteered in the AIDS clinic and got to know people from a really different culture in Baton Rouge.
I'll jump in if you don't mind. So my husband and I do live in Montclair with our dogs, our kids. We have 3 children. They're all grown up, thank God. And proof that there is a God, thank God. And, but we mainly raised them in Baton Rouge. And how that happened was that my husband had been a lawyer and he wanted to be a law professor, and the job he got was at LSU. And at that time, our twins were 2 and our eldest was 6, and we moved down to Baton Rouge, and I was so utterly freaked out. And it ended up being, really, really wonderful for me personally and for our family. I never got over how much I hated the weather. The weather it was sick. It was the one, racism, it was horrible, but I'm white, it didn't affect me. Really, honestly, it wasn't ruining my life. My little life in my bubble was in my bubble of, the neighborhood and the synagogue, and was fine. What I could never get out of the system was the weather. You live in the weather. So yeah, the racism was horrific. The poverty was horrific, all this stuff. But I sound so hard-hearted, but that was the truth. It was the truth. But I did, while I was there for most of the years we lived there, I volunteered once a week in an AIDS hospice. It was a very big part of my life during those 10 years. Nobody there they knew I was white because they could see that. Most of the staff and most of the residents at that time were Black, and mainly not gay, because by then AIDS had turned into a disease of poverty more than a disease of lifestyle, quote unquote, for gay men in the baths, where it started in this country. And it became a huge part of my life. And then we moved up here. So things changed. Now we have better pizza.
What do you generally write in the blog? It's in the Jerusalem Times. Is that the?
It's the Times of Israel.
Times of Israel.
Yeah.
And what sort of topics?
I can write about anything I want. So the Times of Israel, this is the true story. So if you all remember, I'm sure you do, I can't even remember when Trump's second impeachment trial came along. Was it February? January? I don't know. It was about a year ago, right? About a year ago. And I'm reading the newspaper and I'm seeing who his attorney is a Jewish name. And I'm like, wait a minute, it's a guy named David Schoen, Schoen. And I'm like, I turned to my husband, I said, I went to the prom with David Schoen in high school. He says, no, it's a different David Schoen. It's got to be a different David Schoen. Well, lo and behold, it was the same David Schoen. And David Schoen was a year ahead of me in high school. And he was the only Jew, I think, in his class. And I was like the only Jew in my class. It was 550 kids in the class. This was not a small public high school in McLean. And I was peer pressured into going with him by a group of his buddies. And it was just he wasn't a miserable guy, but it was a miserable evening. He was, as a kid, this guy was so shy, he couldn't get a word out. And I was young and nervous and hyper and anxious. And I just, chat, like didn't stop talking all night, blah, 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 blah. God, I just made his life so easy. No wonder the shy boys loved me because I did all their work for them. And I got to the prom. I saw my best friend. I threw my arms around her. I said, don't leave my side. Do not leave my side. Because we'd had dinner beforehand, which was a nightmare. So I'm like, this can't be this. So anyway, but it was the same guy. It was the same guy. And I'm thinking, and he became, I didn't really even know he was Jewish. I think maybe his father was Jewish and his mother wasn't, but his father died when he was a young boy. I didn't know. He didn't look Jewish. He was a redhead. He was a big tennis player. He was just like this really nerdy guy I was friendly with in high school. And so I wrote an article that I called Court Jews in America. Is there such a thing as a court Jew? And it was about David Schoen. Like, why would any Jew take up the cause of, this fascistic, sorry, my opinion, there might be, although I doubt in New Haven, but there might be some, this fascistic and at least on the margins, anti-Semitic, psychopath. Like, who would do that? Jews, like in the bad old days of Germany, would be moneylenders to the prince, but they got like good stuff out of it. It was either that or sell cow dung, right? There wasn't a choice, but why in America would anyone do that? And so I spun out this piece and I sent it, and this was not a piece for the Goyim. This was an argument among ourselves. I didn't want to place it in the New York Times or someplace, if I could have, but it was really for Jews to read about other Jews, right? Private business, family business. So the Times of Israel took it, but they took it as a blog piece. And I didn't realize that as of then, as of being accepted for this, to have this piece run as a blog, in their blog part of the screen, I don't know what you call it. I was now free to blog for them as much as I liked. So I just kept going. Both my sons have since told me that pretty much everyone they know blogs for the Times of Israel. Like, there are no Jews who don't blog for the Times of Israel, but hopefully, I do know that there are a lot of blogs that seem to be written by people who don't, never finished middle school. They don't seem to know how to string two sentences together. But that said, so I do blog, and that piece went huge viral in my high school, among my high school classmates, which was fun for me to hear from people I hadn't talked to in 40 years.
Did you ever hear from David Schoen?
Oh, that's a story. So at the same time, this was all, this was going on, and then the COVID hit and we all went into lockdown, and I started selling my paintings solely for contributions to food, feeding the hungry. What's that called? Come on.
Food banks,
Food
soup
bank?
kitchens.
Food, yeah, so for donations to places that feed the hungry, food banks and places like that, and shelters, because as we all know, with the pandemic came enormous pressure, including hunger, family hunger. And so I put out emails to everyone on my email list. I put it on Facebook. I'm selling my paintings, blah, blah, blah. Here they are. And I ended up selling a whole bunch of them, and I felt good about that. I was really, I want them, out. I don't want to live with my paintings. They're like my children. I make them. I've created them. You're beautiful. Now go. And anyway, so last summer, so it's 6 months after his David Schoen was in front of the world, I got an email from him saying he didn't know how he could have missed it. These emails from me about my paintings, and he'd love to buy a painting. And there were a few back and forths. And I thought, I'd really better tell him about this piece I wrote, because apparently he doesn't seem to know about it. Of course, he was getting excoriated in the press. my piece didn't excoriate him. It was just using him as an example of what could be this way, could be that way. And he saw the, and I sent it to him, and he saw it. He said, you know about it now. He's seen it, and he still wants to buy the piece. And where should he send me? You know, where should he send the money? And he was very, very, actually very generous. He supported all 3 food banks that were in my suggestions. No, yeah, he's an Orthodox Jew. I don't know what that means for him, but he identifies as an Orthodox Jew.
We might have to get him to do a schmooze with us. I don't know. It's
I'm sure he'd be
I now
thrilled.
have so many questions for him.
Right, like, what the? No,
What
sorry.
the heck were you thinking?
No,
Because
I
like
guess
maybe he
he's-
bought your paintings as a way of appeasing some of his guilt or something too. I don't know.
I don't know. I don't know I don't know the guy. I mean, I had one night with him in 1976. Like it lasted, you know, 2 excruciating hours, and then I ran to my best friend. So that I don't know him real well.
So I saw that you have published some young adult novels,
Yeah.
and I was wondering how it was that you made the decision to write those books, and whether you think you might write some more.
Oh, well, that is really kind of wish you hadn't asked that question, but
Oh,
sorry.
why don't we skip it? I can move on to
No, it's
another
okay.
one.
I'll try to tell it fast. So how did I decide? Well, I just thought it might be an easier, kind of just an easier nut to crack, honestly. People had told me, why don't you try YA? You know, it's a growing field. There's, you know, they're published, like you can't, God, you know, you can't sell a short story or a novel unless, you know, you're famous, but, or you're a famous actor, then you can sell something. But, you know, the YA genre is busting wide open. And I thought, you know, maybe I'll do that because, you know, young people are people too, or that's the theory. And I was a young person once, and I'm still a young person, just encased in this otherwise young body. And I sort of decided to kind of just try my hand at it, like, I'll just try. How hard could it be? And then it was like really hard. And also the thing about YA is it's fewer pages. It's a simpler format. It's just a simpler, no, in literary fiction in general, it's any format the author makes. You can write 150 pages first person about a nun, which, a cloistered nun, which there was somebody, Jonathan Salter was that his name, wrote a book that I'm describing very badly. That was like 150, 160 pages about a cloistered nun. Very, you know, one point of view, kind of very focused on this one nun's experience, and it went huge. It got all the praise, you know. So you can do that, or you can write A Suitable Boy, 8,000 pages with 20,000 characters. But that said, the YA just seemed kind of less intimidating to me, so I started doing that, and I had some luck with it, and it was fun, and it was more bite-sized. I didn't feel so intimidated by it. But it's
So
all,
that leads me to, so what plans do you have for the next book? Do you have more short stories that are coming to you, or
no, I haven't.
any?
Yeah,
I know
I've
you've written
got 2 more
nonfiction.
books. I've published so many short stories at this point. Again, mainly in literary and small magazines. I have 2 more books of Yiddish short stories, you know, just sitting in my computer, and then another book or 2 of non-Jewish, you know, just short stories about people who aren't in the tribe. So, you know, I'd love to publish another book of short stories or 2. I'm kind of, at this point, I'm all but certain that I could publish a second volume with a tiny publisher like I did with this one, but I kind of want to hold off and see if maybe I can score higher up the publishing ladder next time around. So I'm just holding off on that. And I'm working on I'm working on a novel about 2 rival synagogues. Well, not about 2 rival synagogues, about the people in two rival synagogues in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Something I know a little bit about.
Is that based on actual experience or just, you just said it there?
No, I mean, in real life, just as, oh gosh, in real life. So my husband and I and our kids were very involved and felt very happy and at home at our little traditional Reform synagogue in Baton Rouge, Beth Shalom. And when we moved there, we thought we would join the other Reform synagogue. There were two Reform in Baton Rouge because it was in our neighborhood. We thought, this is great. We'll be able to walk. We got there like, no. This was not for us. It was like, they actually serve shrimp etouffee for, Shabbat. So like, this was not like, fine, be happy, but like, no, not for us. And mainly at that particular synagogue, the rabbi was just a freaking idiot. He was a stupid man. He offended me with his stupidity. And so we went to the other synagogue, which we had to drive to, 10 minutes, but still it would have been nice to walk on the, 2 weeks a year when the weather permits you to walk. And we loved the rabbi, and it was more our speed. It was, as I say, it was traditional and a Reform. And so we ended up there. And then that great rabbi left, and then it was a crappy rabbi, but then we got a really, really good rabbi. And at the time we had the really, really good rabbi, Stan Zamek, who my husband and I, our kids all just loved him. That's when Hurricane Katrina came around, and then a few months later, Hurricane Rita. None people up in the East didn't know about Hurricane Rita because it only devastated Baton Rouge. And Hurricane Rita pretty much ripped our roof off. And so then there was a big push inside our synagogue. Is it time to merge with what we all called the other temple, right? The other rabbi. We hated them so much we didn't even call them by their name. It was the synagogue I would never set foot on, and kind of thing. And sorry, I've lost track. And so there was kind of this big civil war inside our synagogue. There were it was mainly the mean old men in the shul who thought they ran things because they had, back in the day, who said, they had a fiscal responsibility to the shul versus like the spiritual responsibility of the congregants. And in the end, our rabbi and the younger people, among them my husband and I, prevailed, and we raised the money and rebuilt the synagogue and actually made the physical plant much lovelier and more kind of user-friendly. And the two rival synagogues continued on hating each other. But it's not a new story. The details are always different, but the underlying story is always the same. But ironically, almost 14 years after my husband and we moved up here, those two once rival synagogues, Baton Rouge has never exactly been like the Jerusalem of the South. It's got a very tiny Jewish population, and it's even smaller than it was when we lived there. And the two synagogues decided to merge without the pressure, without having some disaster. It was organic, and they merged, and we're like, really? You're merging with them? Right? But of course, we're not, we're not on the ground anymore. Things have shifted for the better in the community.
Well, I'm definitely looking forward to reading that when you get it published.
Well, I've got to write it first. I've got to finish writing it.
Yeah.
Right now, I'm like, oh my God, did I write this piece of complete garbage? Get rid of the whole chapter. It's hard.
Yeah. I imagine that it is work.
Yeah.
I've run through my questions.
Yeah, there's is there anything in the chat I need to
I have a
look at?
question, if that's okay,
Yes,
and then Judy. Because you're a painter and a writer, I'm very curious about process in a way, and especially the way you describe your writing process as that the stories kind of come to you and then you create them on paper or digitally.
Right.
First of all, is your painting muse similar? And do you have like today's a painting day and today's a writing day, or are they more like eras?
No. I mean, sometimes I just know I got to take a break from this is more cerebral for me, and the painting more, I don't even feel like my brain is involved in the painting. I feel like
Mhm.
it's just my hands. It's like my hands and maybe my visual field, which I guess
Mhm.
is related to my brain, but doesn't feel that way when I'm in the process. And the paintings come to me the way the short stories do, in a way that they just, like, it feels like an image is just downloaded into my inner screen. And if it's something that kind of gets me, I just sketch it out. I just sketch it roughly so I don't forget. And then if it continues to call to me, I'll paint it. And sometimes it comes to me in full color, sort of almost exactly, the what do you call it, the architectural plans, like the blueprint for
Mhm.
what then emerges. And sometimes once I start on it, there's much more change along the way than what I had envisioned. But by then it's an organic growth, like an outgrowth of what I've already created on the paper, visually. Something's missing or something's off, and it will come to me what I need to change. But the basic organic piece of it is there for me to work with. So I often see work in museums or in people's homes that I just love, and I kind of want to do it. I want to do something like that, but it's not organic to me. So I just don't do it. It's not mine to do. And my work is it's very I'm an outsider artist. I mean, that's the sort of category I'm in because I am completely untrained. Um, and and over the years, friends of mine have suggested I go to take classes, painting classes. I'm like, not no, not in a million years, not now anyway. Maybe there'll become a time when I want to broaden or change or learn techniques. But right now, I'm like, no, I like the way it comes out very raw. I don't want to get somebody else's ideas kind of stuck in there to mess up my jam. So in that way, it's similar, but otherwise, um, they're the two things that I kind of came into the world with. That I kind of have to. Like, I feel like I have to paint and I kind of have to write. I also play the piano, not very well, but like I don't have to play the piano. That's something I kind of imposed on myself. Like, well, I'm going to learn piano. I'm learn my grandma, make my dead grandmothers proud. It's like more coming outside in. The painting and the writing are, just sort of, they come from deep inside.
Great. Judy?
I had a question thinking about, you talked about sort of the tribe vibe and feeling Jewish and writing in a way that's Yiddishkeit, in terms of but I know McLean from the era you're talking about. My husband grew up in segregated Alexandria, Virginia, and
Right.
we'd go out to see friends out in Leesburg in Loudoun County. We called it, you'd get after McLean, then it was dark. I mean, there was just like
Right.
nothing out there.
Right.
So
there are
I'm
horses.
wondering, how did you discover this part of you if you're in McLean, and did you feel separate and Jewish in McLean, even though you didn't have that kind of cultural experience in the community? Or was it when you got to Tufts and started to sort of see it in a Northeast United States perspective? Or I'm just trying to think of
I just had to get out of
is
my
it in our
wacko.
DNA? I mean, is it just there?
I think it was for me. I think, my father was like this, is this very, very involved religious Jew. My father goes to Orthodox shul to this day. He started going to, when my parents were married in the mid-50s, they moved to Washington. They lived in Georgetown, which was like, not a fancy place then at all. And had this little shoebox of a house, and he walked the 2 blocks to the famous N Street synagogue, where Rabbi had a little problem a few years ago, landed on the front pages. He was imprisoned. Anyway, it's the same synagogue, Kesher Israel. And my father started going there as a young husband and young father, and we moved out to McLean. He kept going there. He's since moved back to Georgetown. And he still goes there. So, this was a big, 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 big part of his life. And my mother, with her reform, very reform, and her mother was Southern, like was a Southern belle. My mother was socially Jewish. She went to Jewish summer camps, and they had Christmas and all that stuff. she was confirmed in her Reformed temple in Scarsdale and had no interest in Judaism at all, but her whole life, her whole social world was Jewish until she met my father, and he plunked her in like waspy, legal Washington. And his whole world had been Jewish until Washington. They both went to Ivy League schools, so they met plenty of people there who weren't Jewish and befriended them, and kept those friendships through life. And then so for me, it was like Dad had this thing, I wanted this thing, but I also hated this thing. Because it was a really prominent big part of our family life, this thing that only Dad had, that we were supposed to. Except my brother, the only boy, he had to become a bar mitzvah. And that was a big, big thing. We talked about it all the time. He had to be a bar mitzvah. And Dad saying, driving us to this English style English style public school, day school, where we wore the uniforms and played field hockey and all that. My father drove his 4 curly haired kids there to school every morning on his way. The school was on his way to work as he went from McLean towards Chain Bridge and into Washington, and he took us to school. And he, to this day, we joke about it, me and my siblings, that he smoked a cigar and sang Hebrew synagogue, prayers in a terrible voice that was embarrassing to witness, even as his own kid. And he'd go on and on, and he'd sing Al Jolson. And so it was like a big, huge part of his life. And my mother did her best to support that, as somebody who wasn't raised in any kind of traditional house, but knew it was important for her husband. So, we had what my mother called Friday night dinner. It was never called Shabbos or Shabbat. Mom called it Friday dinner, and she would get her hair done for Friday night, as ladies of that era did. And then she would say, would you pass the Shabbos? She called it Shabbos bread until the day she died. It was the Shabbos bread. And when I had my best friend, Nancy Higgins Chapin, that's her real name, she's still alive, I've lost touch with her. I had Nina over for dinner Friday night, which was often the case. We slept over at each other's houses, Friday night sleepover. Nina's still talking about the Shabbos bread. I'm sorry, the Sabbath bread. It was so good, the Sabbath bread. So it was just like, it was weird. I met my husband and he was like, what? Like, what is this? I'm like, I don't know. You tell me, because I don't know what it is. It's just the way we were raised. But I wanted it. It was in me. I felt like I'd been deprived of my own heritage. And I wanted it, and I found my way in, not through the religion per se, but through literature and just through educating myself. I go to synagogue. We belong to Conservative synagogue, for God's sakes. I don't like services. I want to be out of there. I'm glad they're there for people who want them and appreciate them. I'm glad it's traditional, because if it's not in Hebrew, to me, it's fake. It's ridiculous. It makes no sense. I loved our Reform shul in Baton Rouge. But I inherited a lot of my father's, prejudices and weirdnesses around Judaism, including traditional is more the real thing, which is, I don't even believe that. I don't even believe it myself, but it's like in me. And two of our children, my 2 sons are both Orthodox. They grew up, we sent them to Episcopal school in Baton Rouge, because it was either that or go to school where you get stabbed. And, they grew up to be Orthodox, and my eldest son served 4 years in the IDF. Go figure. And our daughter's engaged to be married to Irish Catholic boy from Illinois. Her name is when she's married, is going to be Rosie Mulvihill. Irish enough for you? And he's a lovely guy, and we would kill her if she didn't marry him.
They can be very lovely. I've had one for 47 years. They can
Oh,
be
there
very,
you
very
go.
lovely.
Anyone else have any questions or comments? I really want to encourage people to read the book.
Now, please read the book.
Please read the book. And the one thing I wanted to ask you is, do the sales of this book have any impact on future publishing of other books of short stories for you? I mean, do they look back at that and say, oh, well,
Absolutely. That's the only thing they do look at is the
Okay.
sales numbers. I mean,
so buy the book?
yeah, I would like to say that, it will really help me pay for my expensive coffee, but it won't. It's really about the numbers. It's absolutely about the numbers. I mean, if I even get paid, I'm like, woo, let's do it. $10. Woo! I'm cruising into Easy Street now.
There you go. There you go. You can
Right,
buy your
so-
Maserati or something if we buy enough books.
It's all about the numbers, yeah. So please, yeah, give if it's in any of your hearts to buy it for, present or give it to your friends.
Yeah.
it-
And of course, we
it-
have it at the
and every
Sisterhood
time I
gift
make a
shop.
single
So
sale, it actually makes a difference. Sorry?
we have it. We are selling it at our Sisterhood
Yeah,
gift
I know.
shop. So I want to encourage everybody who's at all interested to rush over there before the
Rush.
snowstorm and buy the
Oh,
book,
boy.
so you'll have something to read in what I
So
hear
my
is going
late
to be a messy
mother-
day. What's
My
that?
mother died. Mother died, I think 19 years ago already. And when she was still alive, she was like my publicist. She would make everybody buy my book. And then she would make them read it. She'd like, what did you think? Well, what did you think of this part? And so, she's gone, and
Yeah.
it's no good. It's just
All right,
no
I'll
good.
take over for your mother. Buy the book, read the book.
I have an Aunt Rose who I just visited. I'll give her the book and she can do that because she's very good at that.
Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you so much. This was really interesting. I love hearing your voice because it's actually kind of similar to your writing voice in a way. Your sense of humor, and sometimes you'll feel like, oh, did she mean it that way or did she mean it that way? Which I always love if I'm reading. I like to be, have a little bit of guessing to do.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for
Okay.
joining us. Thank you,
Yeah,
Helen and
thank you.
Cynthia,
Yeah.
for helping to make
It's,
this
it's really
happen.
been a pleasure. It's really, really been a pleasure. I usually hate
Thank
Zoom,
you.
but this has been.
Well, good. So
But
next
is it
week,
Is it Sally's or is it the other one that's better?
well, it depends who you talk to.
Sally's is better.
Is that what you say, Sally's? Show of hands, Sally's. Pepe's.
Your
Modern.
taste buds, you need to go to the doctor. No, you got to go to the
Modern,
doctor.
we got a lot of.
Something's wrong with taste buds.
The bottom line is if you live in New Haven, you just don't eat pizza anywhere else because it's all pretty darn good. You kind of
Yeah.
can't get a bad slice.
I'm sure
So,
that's true.
at least
New
compared to the
Jersey's
rest of the world.
New Jersey's up there, but New Haven.
Yeah, New Jersey is good and New York, but New
Yeah,
Haven.
no, New Haven still wins. That's true. Right. Thank
So
you so
just
much.
thinking ahead, next Wednesday, we have Thomas Huddleston. He's currently working with JCAR on the recruitment and training of new volunteers to join the team to welcome a new Afghan refugee family. He's been working for 15 years, providing international research and advice through the Migration Policy Group, the field's leading European think tank. And he has had his own personal experiences with the challenges and rewards of sponsorship, having participated in European Community Sponsorship Project. So that's next Wednesday, 7:30, same Zoom link. And I hope to see many of you there. And thank you all for coming. Rachel, did you want to add anything? No? Okay. Good night, everyone.
Good
Thank
night,
you so much,
everyone.
Jennifer.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.